I separated from my first wife in 1993. It was difficult, and one of the kids was away at an overnight the night that we separated. And the next day, I sat down with my oldest child and a daughter to explain what was happening, that my wife and I were separating. And my daughter was floored. And she said, I never saw you and mom argue. And I said, that's right, hon, we don't argue. When's the last time you saw us hug? And she sort of shook her head and said, oh, I get it. One of the things I think that divorcing parents or parents who are considering divorce need to keep in mind is that divorce is hard on kids. They'll rebound from it, though, as long as both parents stay connected with them and put their interests first. But one of the things that you need to be aware of is if you're in a marriage where you're unhappy, you're modeling that for your children too. And so you think about, would you want your children to stay in a marriage where they're very unhappy? So this story is one I haven't shared before, but it has stuck with me now almost 30 years. Because the message really is that there's more to a marriage than not arguing. There's whether you are real partners, whether you're sharing things, and you want to model the best sort of relationship for your children. So my second marriage now, which is going on close to 30 years now, has modeled that kind of relationship for our children.
Well, hello, this is Don.
And Gina.
And we're with Focused Healthy Family. And today, this is podcast number 26, and we're talking with Dr. Don Hubin from the National Parents Organization, and we're talking about shared parenting. But before we get into it, let's hear from our sponsor.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Q Sciences. Don and I discovered that the supplements we were taking and giving to our children were not being absorbed properly. I was very excited when I found Q Sciences. I was impressed with the quality of the products and that they provide maximum absorption. They have a variety of products, including a Q Max product, which is a combination of 3 products, including vitamins, minerals, and a probiotic. They also have hemp oil, a vitamin B12 spray, a sleep spray, and kids products. I've really seen a difference in how these products are improving how I feel, improving my mental health, and I'm happy with the quality of these products and how they're helping our whole family. If you'd like to learn more,
simply go to qsciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's the letter Q, sciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. Or you can find a link on the front page of the focusedhealthyfamily.com website.
And stop throwing your money away on supplements that don't work and use a quality product like Q Sciences.
And we're back. In today's podcast, we're talking with Dr. Don Hubin. He is Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and Founding Director of Emeritus of the Center of Ethics and Human Values at Ohio State University. He is also board chair for the National Parents Organization. We're going to talk about shared parenting and the issues around that concept. Welcome, Dr. Hubin. I appreciate you being here and taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
And I wanted to start out today by reading the National Parent Organization's mission statement, because I think it's a really neat mission statement. It goes as this: to improve the lives of children and strengthen society by protecting every child's right to the love and care of both parents after separation or divorce. We achieve this mission through 3 core programs: research and reports, public awareness, and family court reform. So I also like to start, Don, with you telling us the story you told us before we got on air here, I guess you'd say, about you and your first wife getting back together after 30, I shouldn't say it that way, I guess, but coming together after 30 years for a little project. Can you retell that story for us?
I will. Let me give you just a bit of background.
Sure.
Sometimes there is a fantasy about divorce where the couple decide they can't live together, but they really put the children's interests first, and they get together every week for coffee and to talk about the kids. And sometimes people even say we're best friends, but we just couldn't live together. That may happen sometimes, but it's very rare. I've seen very few cases like that. And my divorce was not amicable. It was we went through the legal system, and the legal system exacerbated the problems. Of course, we had differences and disagreements, but the legal system exaggerated those. It pushed us into opposite corners. It put us in opposition with one another, and it caused a lot of problems. Nevertheless, I always had shared parenting of my children, even during the court proceedings, and their mother and I engaged in what researchers call parallel parenting. We didn't get together every week and talk. We didn't talk about little things. If the kids had a problem in school, if there was a medical issue, of course we talked with one another and we worked that out. But for the most part, we lived our own lives separately. The kids had two homes. They never thought that they had one home and then visited with the other parent. They had two homes. There are inconveniences that arise from having two homes. I can't tell you how many times I ran down to their mom's house to get some homework that they had left there, or maybe first thing in the morning before they went to school, we had to go. Those are inconveniences, but they're minor. The kids always knew that they had a home with each of their parents. They saw both of us engaged in the everyday activity of raising the kids. I mean, cooking dinner, making sure they got their homework done, getting them off to school in the morning with breakfast and packing their lunches and so forth. We were both doing that. We were both fully engaged. And the research shows that this is best for children when parents are living apart. Children almost always do best in a shared parenting situation and in a situation that's as close to equal shared parenting as is practical. So you asked me about this story that I was talking about before we came on air. As I said, my ex and I, for the most part, operated separately. We were together when our children got married, and they've had children. We now have 5 grandchildren. We got together at these things, and everything was fine, but we were not close. But recently, we got together and we put together all of the photographs that each of us had of the kids as they were growing up. And my children's mother put them in order chronologically, which was no mean feat, because over the decades, the kids had pulled them out and put them in different places and borrowed them for school projects or to show their friends or something. So my ex-wife got them all in chronological order. I scanned them all, and now we have a Google photo album that the two of us and all of our kids have access to do this. And it was just a nice example of the ability to come together and cooperate. It wasn't uncomfortable or awkward. So divorce, I mentioned that our divorce was not a completely amicable divorce, but I want to emphasize that split ups are never easy, especially when you have kids. But the legal system makes it worse, and the legal system makes it worse by setting up a winner-loser situation where parents are fighting with one another instead of trying to work out a way for these parents to live separately but to co-parent their children. I sometimes think that if an alien from a completely different culture were to take a look at how we handle marital separation, they would think the system was designed by a sadist. I mean, why on earth would you use a highly adversarial system with lawyers? Why on earth would you have a plaintiff and defendant, right? Why don't you have mom and dad? I remember talking to a researcher who also was a custody evaluator, and he made the point this way. He said, I have never met a child who said, well, my custodial parent picked me up from the bus stop tonight, but then I'm going to go to my non-custodial parents for dinner. That's not the way anyone thinks about it, except the legal system. And people complain that divorcing parents are locked in a battle with one another. And I want to say to those in the divorce system, the judges and the lawyers and the legislators who have control over the system, I want to say, You've created the Hunger Games, and then you complain that these people are fighting. Don't set it up so there's a winner and a loser. Set it up so that both parents can continue to have a relationship with their children, as long, of course, there's an exception if one of the parents is violent. If, of course you have to have exceptions for that, but those are the exceptional cases, the rare cases. Set it up for the normal case and then handle the exceptions as appropriate.
That makes so much sense, Don. I appreciate you sharing your own story of your own divorce. In talking with you and the collaborative lawyer we spoke to and the mediator, this is an eye-opener for us. And it's so true what you're saying, that, the lawyers described that very situation, that it's set up as win-lose and pitting one against the other. And, is that really what we want for families, whether the parents are together or not? So this is powerful information, and we're glad that we're able to speak with you and others to share this.
Well, and one of the notes I wrote was, it seems like the legal system has tried to put like rules and mathematic equations and codes and everything like that to try to make this a process, versus, like you said, two parents getting together to figure out how to separate themselves.
Yeah. So, and I'm not a lawyer basher. I have, in fact, one of my sons is a lawyer. My sister-in-law is a lawyer. They don't do family law, but I'm not a lawyer basher, and I know many, many fine domestic relations attorneys and judges and magistrates, and God bless them. These are hard jobs to do. These are very difficult jobs to do. I understand that, but the system itself is part of the problem. And it's grown up this way, not through bad intentions on anyone's part, but through a series of historical factors. I mean, there was a very brief history of custody law here. There was a time when, if parents divorced, which was very rare at the time, fathers got custody unless the fathers were unfit. And mother's ability to be with the children at all were up to the discretion of the father. This was true until sort of the late 1800s. And then there was a shift to maternal custody, first for young children, then it extended to all ages. And many states had a legal presumption that when parents divorce, mom shall have custody unless mom is unfit, right? Other states didn't have that legal presumption, but the courts actually operated on that model. And part of the reason was that we were in a time when more families were single income. Dad worked away from home. We're past the time when most fathers worked on the farm. They worked in factories or corporations of some sort. So they were away from the home during the week. Mom was home. So yeah, mom should have custody, and then we'll split the weekends between mom and dad can see them in that way. But that was always a little bit of a fiction about how American life went. But it was more true in the 50s and 60s than it is now. Most families are dual income families. Of those families that are dual income, the moms earn more than the dads in 1/3 of those cases. And so it's not as if the moms are taking a little part-time job for a little extra money. I mean, they have a career as well. And the legal system just hasn't really caught up with that. In most places, the default parenting time schedule is every other weekend and one evening a week for the non-residential parent. And that simply doesn't fit with modern patterns of parenting.
So if we can, let's talk a little bit about the organization. How did it get started, and what your involvement is, and what I read the mission statement. What's their objective or their goal, I guess.
Yeah. So I describe NPO as a child-focused, research-based organization. And what I mean by that is our main objective is to promote children's well-being when the parents are living apart. We're focused on divorced and separated parents. That's what drives us. There are lots of things wrong with our divorce system. And one could complain about a number of different things. Our focus is on what affects child well-being. And we now have 40 years of research that shows that when when children's parents are living apart from one another, they do best on virtually every metric. In fact, I think actually every metric of child well-being, if the parents are sharing in raising them in a substantially equal way. I guess I should say this, they do better or as well as children raised in intact families if both parents are highly involved in sharing parenting responsibilities as well as possible. Now, early on, there were some concern about whether those better outcomes for children in shared parenting situations, whether those outcomes were the result of the shared parenting or other features of those families that chose to do shared parenting, because we can't do a controlled experiment and say we're going to take these 100 families and do shared parenting and these 100 families and do sole custody and see how, it's a self-selected sample, that the people that do shared parenting. And by and large, those who do shared parenting are more highly educated, they have higher incomes, and they tend to have lower levels of conflict between one another. And so some researchers said, well, we don't really know whether the children do better because of the shared parenting or whether they do better because of these other factors. Now, recent research has shown that the shared parenting itself produces these better effects, contributes to the better effects. Some of the research comes from other countries where, for example, in Sweden, the vast majority of cases of separated parenting are shared parenting, substantially equal shared parenting, regardless of the income or educational level of the parents. And the children do better in that situation than in a sole custody situation. So we've got this research that shows that it's best for children. We've also done polling in 25 of the 50 states. And when I say we've done polling, it's not NPO calling up and saying, we're a shared parenting organization. What do you think of shared parenting? Which might be a suspect way to do your research. We engage a respected independent company to do our polling for us. And the polling consistently shows that the overwhelming majority of people think that shared parenting is best for children. And when I say overwhelming majority, I mean 85% and up. And over 80% would support there being a change in their state's laws to make shared parenting the default presumption. Right? And when you dig down into the data, you find that this support for shared parenting cuts across every demographic divide: age, race, ethnicity, religion, political affiliation, and importantly, gender. It's wildly supported by the general public, but the legal system has been slow to change. And so we still have this default model of sole custody and visitor. You asked about the history of NPO. NPO started as a Massachusetts organization in the 1990s. It was called Fathers and Families because the focus was on how to get fathers, back connected with their families even when they're living separately. And the focus was really pretty much the same as what we have now, but moms get cut out of their children's lives too, and perfectly good, fit, loving moms wind up in the visitor mode, the every other weekend mode sometimes. And that's, I have to remind men who are going through divorce, who think that it's so unfair to men, I point out to them that there is a mommy track and a daddy track. There's this historical reason for there being these two tracks. But, and you think the daddy track's pretty bad, I say to them, but the only thing that's worse than being a daddy in the daddy track is being a mommy in the daddy track. Because then you have all of the estrangement from the children, the separation from the children and so forth, but also the stigma. How did you lose custody? I mean, people expect fathers to lose custody. How does moms lose custody? So we have chapter leaders who are moms. We have chapter leaders who are grandmas, because here's another thing that people often overlook. When you marginalize one parent, you don't just separate the child from that parent. You separate the child from that parent's whole extended family. Mm. So I'll tell you, I'm in Ohio, and I was working with an Ohio organization here for many years before I joined NPO. And at one of our monthly meetings, a couple came in. They were in their 60s, I think, which at that point seemed a little older to me than it does now. But They said, we have a family farm and we have kids and we have 7 or 8 grandchildren. And every summer, the grandchildren come to our farm for 2 weeks, all of the grandchildren.
Wow.
The parents get that 2 weeks off, the kids are all here. They love the farm. They see their cousins. They get to milk cows. They get to drive tractors. They get, it's a wonderful experience. Our son got divorced. And the 2 weeks when all the other kids can come to the farm are weeks when the court-ordered parenting schedule gives the kids to the mom, and the mom won't let them come. And I just realized, okay, these kids have they've been deprived of this close relationship with their grandparents, with their cousins, and it's all because of the rigidity of the court system. And of course, this mom in this particular case made a bad decision, but the courts allowed it to be done in this.
Well, that all leads right up to your report cards. I found that fascinating when I went up to the site and found that, and of course, our state of North Carolina gets a D- on that, which doesn't make me real proud. But let's talk a little bit about that, because it makes sense now when you talk about it starting out as fathers and families, why you kind of lead into the child support part of it. And I think that's really what the report cards kind of talk about. Is that correct?
So we have 2 report cards. One grades the states on their custody legislation. To what degree do they support shared parenting? And that one was done most recently in 2019. And one of the things I have to point out about this is it's not grading the states on the actual court decisions. We don't have data on that. No one has data on that. The courts don't aggregate the data. We don't. I mean, the Census Bureau makes estimates about how many kids are living in sole custody and so forth, but they don't really know because we don't collect these data and aggregate them. So we're not grading the courts on their behavior. We're grading the legislatures on what have they done to enact statutes that promote shared parenting. So we ask, does the state explicitly permit shared parenting? And by shared parenting, we mean joint legal custody. That's the responsibility to make decisions for the children about their health care, their education, their religious upbringing, and so forth. And then physical custody. That's where the children are actually residing. Shared parenting involves both of those. Both parents continue to have legal custody of the children as they did when they were married, and both parents share in the physical custody of their children. So do the state statutes explicitly permit it? Do they have a policy statement encouraging it? Do they have a preference for shared parenting over sole custody? And finally, do they have a legal presumption of shared parenting? And the states vary radically in this. One of the Supreme Court justices said that the states are the laboratories of democracy. And he meant by that the states can try different things and see what works. They're experimenting with different things. Well, we have lots of experimentation going on in the states, doing radically different things. And the results are rolling in now. We now have strong shared parenting legislation in Arizona since 2014. We have NPO spearheaded the effort to get an equal shared parenting presumption passed in Kentucky in 2018. Last year, Arkansas passed a presumption of equal shared parenting, and earlier this year, West Virginia did. Those are the states that get grades in the A range in our evaluation. Those are the states where the legislators have looked at the research and said, the research shows it's best for kids for both parents to be fully involved and engaged in raising the kids, even when the parents are living apart. And so we're going to make that the default presumption. And of course, there are exceptions. I mean, sometimes there are just strategic considerations. The parents may live too far apart. Sometimes there are considerations having to do with work. I mean, one parent may have, if you have a long haul truck driver, you're not going to be able to alternate parenting time the way you normally would, and so forth. There are those sorts of exceptions. there are exceptions when one of the parents, certainly when one of the parents is abusive to the children, or when one of the parents is abusive to the other parent, and those are all appropriate. But we should set the default presumption for the typical case. And the typical case is that both parents love their children. Both parents are fine parents. Maybe one parent's a little better than parents, but one of the slogans that, it hasn't been an NPO slogan, but one of the slogans that other organizations that align with NPO have used for decades now is the best parent is both parents, right? We shouldn't be looking for the best parent. And maybe mom is a better parent than dad, or maybe dad is a better parent than mom. I'll tell you another story from personal story. This is actually my current wife. She wanted shared parenting when she went through her divorce, and her attitude was always, well, so what if for breakfast at dad's house they have a bowl of tricks, instead of scrambled eggs or something like that. They'll survive that just fine. People can get wrapped up in their hostility towards one another and not think about what really matters. And maybe one parent doesn't have the best judgment with the kids, but as long as the kids are safe, as long as the kids are fed, that's no reason to push that parent out of the kids' lives. Those four states I mentioned, they're getting an A on this. The legislatures have really addressed this. In many states, the legislatures just haven't addressed it very well. They have legislation that allows shared parenting, but they don't say to the courts, look, this is the starting point. This is what you should assume is going to be the outcome, and then have a reason to move away from that. So that's the shared parenting report card. And we've seen progress over the years. We first did this in 2014, and there was some significant progress between 2014 and 2019. And as I mentioned, 2 states, Arkansas and West Virginia, passed equal shared parenting laws just since 2019. And a number of other states have passed laws that help move them toward having better shared parenting policies. You mentioned child support, and just this year we concluded a year-long study of the state's child support policies. Now, we are pro-child support. Children need financial support. We want to emphasize they also need emotional support and spiritual support and all of that, but of course they need financial support. We are pro-child support, but what we found is that there's just huge disparity in how the states approach child support. And we wanted to focus on the one aspect of child support that is most connected with shared parenting. And that is how do you divide the combined resources of the 2 parents between the 2 households when the children actually have 2 homes. So this is what's called a parenting time adjustment. The child support guidelines were designed for a sole custody situation. So there you think, okay, the custodial parent spends money directly on the children. The non-custodial parent doesn't. So the non-custodial parent should be sending money to the custodial parent. Right? But what do you do when the children have 2 homes? Well, both parents have a financial obligation to their children. How do you divide up that combined obligation? And here's what we found. 9 states have no parenting time adjustment at all. And what that means is a parent who never sees his or her children will pay exactly the same amount as a parent who has his or her children living with them 50% of the time. Now, that parent can go to court and can ask the court to deviate from the guidelines. And the courts may do that, but a deviation by definition is arbitrary, and it's a deviation. The court, there's no formula for it. There's no model, and different courts do different things. And some courts just say, no, I'm not going to deviate. Those states have child support policies that are barriers to shared parenting. And sometimes they're just hard economic barriers. It could be the non-custodial parent just doesn't have the resources to provide a suitable home for the children, because that parent may be paying 30% of their take-home pay to the other parent, even though the other parent has the kids only 50% of the time. And sometimes it just makes it harder for the parents to agree on shared parenting, because if you get sole custody, you get all the money, what we did was to grade the states on the degree to which their child support policies promoted or inhibited shared parenting, and how do they divide this money between the two households. And intuitively, if the parents have equal incomes and the parents have the children with them equal amounts of time, and they divide expenses like clothes and so forth equally, there should be no child support money going back and forth at all. But there are numerous states in which that's not true. There's still going to be one person identified as a child support payer, and they're going to be paying child support, and it just doesn't make any sense. So that's the aspect of child support that we looked at. It's just, how do you divide up the resources of the two parents between the two households when the children have two households, two homes?
That's it just sounds so that, well, it sounds like there's a lot to this, a lot more than probably we can cover in the amount of time we have. But it sounds like you're doing some really great stuff, and of course it reinforces the whole idea of how important a mediator is in that kind of case, instead of, like you say, the court putting a defendant and separating the one against the other kind of thing. So.
If I could, I'll tell you one more story from my own background.
Sure.
I thought that my first wife and I would mediate and resolve things. That wasn't her desire. She got a lawyer, a very aggressive lawyer, and sued. And I still tried to do it without getting a lawyer myself. I met with the attorney and tried to work this out. And then I finally realized I needed to engage an attorney. And my first meeting with the attorney, he said, do not talk to your wife about anything unless it has to do with the well-being of the children. She is the opponent.
Yeah.
And what he means is, he doesn't want me saying things that'll sort of undermine the positions they're taking in court and so forth. But that's just an example of how, when parents are divorcing, they're separated, obviously, psychologically, emotionally, have different interests and so forth. But when you go to lawyers, it exaggerates all of those things. And some lawyers will, I think, quite intentionally fan the fires. They will try to stir up hostility, because hostility converts to money for them.
When they want to win too, they want their side to win, to show that they're a good lawyer or whatever, I would imagine, anyway.
And the lawyers who are unscrupulous don't want to win fast. They want to have a long
right
billable hours. So I would say to people who are confronting the challenge of divorce, if there's any way that you can avoid doing it, of course it has to finally be done with a court. But if parents go in and say, here's what we've agreed to, the courts will say yes, unless there's something crazy there. So if you can work with a mediator first, do that. It's not just that you'll save yourself money, and you will. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars you can save if you do that. But beyond the money, it's the hostility that develops through this court fight. And that can go on for years or decades or forever. And that's not good for the kids. So whatever your differences, try to mediate. If mediation doesn't work, I'd recommend that people look at collaborative law, which each person has a lawyer, but there is a commitment to being open and being non-hostile and trying to work to a collaborative solution. And the trick with collaborative law is this: if each of you hire a collaborative law lawyer and you're not able to resolve the issues yourself, those lawyers can't represent you in court. So those lawyers have an interest in bringing you to an agreement instead of going through a court fight. So there are through mediation and through collaborative law, you can avoid the most contentious ways of separating and divorcing.
Sure. Don and I have learned so much through this process, since we have absolutely no experience with divorce from ourselves or even our families. And, it makes so much sense. The media portrays divorce in that court setting, and, it's really a criminal, it's designed dealing with criminals, right? So that there's a winner and a loser. One person's good, one person's bad. And, thinking about our beliefs in parenting and wanting to work cooperatively with our children and empower them and their future, this is really setting kids up for failure.
So the adversarial system works very well for criminal cases, as you're saying. I think it works very well for corporate things. If Apple wants to sue Google for $1 billion and this and that, because first of all, Apple and Google don't have any children that they have to raise together.
Right.
Unless you consider their computers their children.
Surprisingly, these corporations can be going at one another in one venue and in another room making a multi-billion-dollar deal with one another.
Yeah.
Sure.
It doesn't work in personal interactions. We need a less adversarial approach to this. It shouldn't go to the courts first. It should go through a process of mediation and counseling. Parents should learn. It's hard. Parents should learn about the research on co-parenting, because I think a lot of people don't know that that this is feasible even when the parents aren't getting along, and that it's best for children even when the parents aren't getting along. But there isn't that educational process that goes on.
Sure. And that's why we're so passionate about getting this information, speaking with you and all the others to get these resources out there, to let people know that for themselves or other loved ones, that they know that there are other options and they really can put the kids first.
Yeah, I think one of the keys that's come out of this is communication is probably one of the biggest keys to this working and working well.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I guess in kind of closing here is, we'll have this up for people to see, but I also want them to know what's the best way for people, if they want to find out more about shared parenting, about what you do, about all of this, what things would you reference for them, websites, phone numbers, whatever, that you would want to get out there for the audience to know about?
So I just said we're on social media and so forth, but I would just direct people to our website, and it's a simple website to address to remember. It's sharedparenting.org. And so we have lots of resources there for parents. We are mostly focused on trying to reform the system and to educate. We're not so focused on giving the sort of hands-on help for people going through the system. We know how important that is. Most of us know it from personal experience, how important it is, but that's not really the focus of NPO. But we do have some resources there and some links to other organizations that can help people who need that sort of help as they go through the system.
Well, and they can get a report card, I mean, you've been out of school for a while, you feel good getting a report card, even though it might be a D- like North Carolina, who knows?
Is there anything else you wanted to share, Don?
Well, just because Don mentioned North Carolina's D-. One of our board members is a collaborative law attorney in North Carolina, and she and our chapter leader in North Carolina are spearheading an effort to raise North Carolina's grade. So we're hoping to make some progress with the North Carolina legislature and to move them along and to move you from the back of the class up near the front.
Oh, and I would imagine you're talking about Ashley Nicole, correct?
Ashley Nicole Russell, yes.
Yeah, and then she's been on the podcast. She's one of the first ones that will be by the time when this airs, you will have already heard her. But yeah, we and from what we gathered from her interview, she's a powerful person. I have a really good feeling she'll get it done.
She is a dynamo.
Yeah. So, well, Don, it has been wonderful. You're a realm of information, and your stories were great. I think is going to be a real good inspiration for somebody. So, thank you so much for being part of this.
I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
I wanted to circle back around quickly to your story, just because the woman we just interviewed for the previous podcast had very young children at the time of her divorce. And when you described the situation with sitting down to talk to your daughter about it, I'm just curious of her age at the time when you were going through the divorce.
She was 13, and my older son was 9, and my youngest son was 7.
Okay, so
And, children, this is I've said it's always a traumatic experience for children. Although, now that divorce is more common than it was in the 50s and stuff, they don't feel, like they're, in Mars and way away from everyone else. But
Right.
But it's always traumatic, and they don't know how things are gonna operate. And I think that's one of the reasons it's very important for parents right from the outset to do shared parenting, so that the children are reassured that both parents are there for them.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well said. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate this conversation. That's our podcast for today. You can learn more about Don and I at focusedhealthyfamily.com. Visit us on Facebook, on Instagram, Gina at Focused Healthy Family. Again, we'll share all the resources that Don Hubin has shared with us and that information. And we want everyone to remember that how you speak to your children shapes their future.